Hello everyone, my name is Antiu. Welcome to Taiwan is my home. Years ago, there was a popular Japanese TV show, Oshin, about a poor but determined farm girl fighting for her life. Today, we're going to talk about a real-life Oshin. Her name is also Ashin, and she is just as tough as the farm girl. Ashin came from Vietnam. She has been married in Taiwan for 10 years. She uses her handicraft skills her mom taught her and opportunities that Taiwan's provided to enrich herself and to continue down the path of dream. Today I have computer class and... Oh, you have so much stuff. Yes, I do. I put everything together. I am always busy. This is easier for me. Without any relative in Taiwan, her husband is her only standby, but Ashin didn't want to rely everything on him. In her early 20s, she, like every other girl in her age, knew that her chances are limited in her hometown no matter how hard she works. To create happiness, you have to take a leap of faith and leave the country. When I got on the plane, when I said goodbye to my mom, I didn't cry. I thought if I cried, she would be worried, so I didn't. Then, when I went onto the plane, the moment when it took off, I couldn't help it anymore. I couldn't stop crying. Ashin knew that she had to be cautious with every step she takes. She knew only knowledge can empower her and give her the chance to create real happiness. I was like in kindergarten. I couldn't read. I couldn't understand the contact book. I always asked my husband. It was a lot of trouble. Came and married in Taiwan. Her family back in Vietnam has lost a firstborn, but her family here has become more and more depending on her. Selling food is my dream. Her little noodle stand starts business at 7 o'clock in the morning. The gas went out this morning. While waiting, Ashin didn't waste any time. She started cleaning up the stand. She grew up in Vinh Long province in Vietnam. She helped her mother selling fruits along the river since she was a kid. Open up a shop for her is not difficult. She had already dealt with the hardest choice in life. When did you decide to marry him? Just 3 days. We only knew each other for 3 days and we got married. Were you scared? I was scared. I was very scared. I was wondering why he wouldn't stand up. Does he have a problem with his legs? Why wouldn't he stand up? Does he even have legs? I was so scared, but then he stood up and walked around. I was so relieved. Ashin didn't have much time to think about whether he's worth spending the rest of her life with. That time, this man was the only one who went on that blind date with his mother. Ashin found them genuine, and at last he has healthy legs. And also, men there are seldom responsible like Taiwanese men. I thought, fine, I'll marry Taiwanese. 10 days after I went to Ho Chi Minh City, I ran into him. You can call it fate. On this day, she made the choice of her life, marry this stranger from Taiwan, and carry on her living capability and leave the country. We lived above water. There's water everywhere. That's North or South Vietnam? South. Grandma cooked. We watched her cook since little, and we learned a thing or two. Scallions sprinkled on the beef soup with pig bones, sugarcane, and the secret recipe from Vietnam grandmother. Many businessmen are already used to come and have a warm, finest hot soup before work. What is this, flat rice noodles? No, that's just noodles. You have to give customers some convenience. The little goods will add up into great reputation. What roll is that? Spring roll. How much is it? 100 for 4, or you can buy 2. Taro and shredded meat on the inside, wrapped in the crispy, delicious fried roll. People in the early market are still a little out of picture, but they would get waken up by the smell of fried spring rolls. When I was selling veggies, I didn't know what is what. Same thing happened when I go shopping. I would just point at whatever I want and tell the owner this one. Ashin followed her husband opening grocery store. She went from knowing nothing at all in Chinese to now her fluent speaking. Even now, she has a cookery license. It is better than before, when we could only earn as much as we spend. I used to smoke for almost 30 years, but now I have children, so I quit. He would help me prepare the vegetables, wash the dishes. He does the dishes from lunch. I wasn't able to do it myself. Sometimes there's no one at the cashier in the grocery store because the owner went to help his wife. If you want to make some romantic gesture, how would you do it? I don't really know, actually. On this island, Ashin has to sacrifice strength and energy, but she also has chances to learn. I like to learn everything. She's more free to do whatever she wants. If there's anything she wants to try, I will let her, as long as it's not something bad. I once went to learn Korean cuisine. So the noodle stand also sells apple-flavored kimchi. Ashin has an elementary school diploma and she even won the county executive award. Now she's in 8th grade. Not only does she learn from classroom, but also the supermarket is a great place to observe and learn. I'm not afraid of getting criticized. I told customers no matter the food is good or bad, they have to tell me because what we eat are mostly spicy. I separate spicy and non-spicy food. For some food that are supposed to be spicy, I would put the chili aside, not mixed in the noodles. If it's male customer, I would put a little more noodles for him. You gotta let them have enough to eat. Men get extra noodles while women get delicious soup. Ashin does not hesitate on putting basil leaves, and it also makes the soup look delicious. Most of the time, the business is good, but at noon, I get very busy. They know I work alone, and they would say, "It's okay, I can wait." Vietnam is hot for the whole year. Ashin had never experienced winter until she came to Taiwan. There were also prejudice for foreigners like her. I'd tell my husband after I came home. He would say, "Just ignore it. Why would you care?" He told me to say, "Even my husband doesn't care. Why do you?" Every bite of the beef rice noodle contains several layers of flavor. Basil's strong taste, lime sour, and the fresh from the soup. Life is not always well in a foreign country. Ashin knew there will be lucky times, but there will also be difficult times. I tell myself, put up with it. Customers' reactions are just reactions. I don't have to respond to anything that makes me uncomfortable. Taiwan has winter, just like people have cold side. Ashin learned not to head on. I sell hot food in winter, cold food in summer. Between spring and summer, she sells fried spring rolls. People tend to eat fried food in cold weather, so when it's hot, I sell buns with salads in it. Shrimp spring rolls are different. The filling has to be perfect, not too wet, not too dry. Ashin has been studying Taiwanese tastes. At first, her husband complained about her spending too much time in the kitchen. Now their noodle shop has livened up, her husband realized the reason. There are two kinds of lemongrasses. Taiwanese citronella is one, what we want is another one. Ashin chose the other one to saute and stir-fry with vegetables. Fresh made can prevent the meat from turning hard too easily. Ashin has already prepared the best-selling dish for summer, cold rice noodles mixed with pork and lemongrass. She believes that as long as she is ready, she doesn't have to worry about getting beaten up. Get some cilantro for me, I ran out of it. A little past 12 and the stand is already full of customers. Add coconut milk. The rich, tasted Vietnam dishes enlighten businessmen's daily, regular lives. I don't control everything. She came all the way from Vietnam. I have to walk in her shoes, right? But her husband has some complaints too. He knows Ashin wants to study, but she has to take care of the stand and the kids at the same time. She rarely has time for study, not to mention getting a junior high school diploma. He wanted his mother-in-law to come visit longer so he could help taking care of their kid. They couldn't stay long, the government wouldn't let them. They could only stay for a month. This time, Ashin's mother is finally coming to see her. She is so happy. Are you excited about your mom coming tomorrow? Yes, very happy. I couldn't even sleep well at night. Ashin looks happy when she talks about her mother, but she's even happier when she talks about her husband. Cook up a bowl of soup with her simple daily life and taste it together. That is cherishing. Do you think you're a romantic person? I'm alright. My husband always gives me courage, gives me love. I know he loves me, he often says it. I'm too shy to say it back. Ashin from Vietnam recently told us she has expanded her noodle stand into a bigger shop. One's effort will pay off one day. Later, we're going to talk about another story of filial piety. Welcome back to Taiwan is my home. People often worry about mother-daughter-in-law issues. This case we're going to talk about is relatively special. They're both overseas Chinese in Myanmar. Years after they became Taiwanese immigrants, they decided to open a restaurant. The mother says it came from the daughter's filial piety, while the daughter claimed it was the mother's support. Thanks to their mutual understanding, Taiwanese gourmets now have a new place to taste Yunnan cuisine. 12 years ago, when Mrs. Wang, a woman who's been a housewife for over half of her life, opened this restaurant, she was already 63 years old. That time, her grandson was newly born. Her daughter-in-law, Sayan Li, encouraged her to walk out of the house and make herself a new style of life. That time, my father-in-law was gone. If she continues staying home, she gets bored. And she thinks about my father-in-law, she cries. There's no focus of her life. Lee used to follow her husband running business in South Africa, and now she decided to stay in Taiwan. But she found out just by talking to her isn't enough. Mr. and Mrs. Wang had a very close relationship. Mrs. Wang suddenly lost the love of her life. Even it's been 12 years, her eyes reddened the moment we brought it up. Yes, very considerate. How so? She's real. She's more thoughtful than a real daughter. Your turn. Wiping off the tears, Mrs. Wang couldn't stop complimenting her daughter-in-law. Lee took up the thread of the conversation and said it was a proposal for Mrs. Wang. Actually, it's all because of her support. Actually, opening this shop was mutual. I wanted to open it for her, and she was doing it for me too, because cooking is one of my favorite hobbies. I thought if we open a noodle shop, it's simple, and we can run it together. That's what I thought, and my mother-in-law thought she'd support my dream. The shop is remodeled from their own garage. With only 6 tables and 20 chairs, here Lee and Mrs. Wang are memorizing their sour, spicy hometown flavor by their own cooking. Every morning, Lee goes to the market to buy fresh ingredients. The strong flavor of onions is the basic of Yunnan cuisine, but every time they peel the onions, they cry in front of each other. The hallway in front of the shop became an open studio for peeling onions. You crying? The daughter-in-law is abusing the mother. Yes, my daughter-in-law is abusing me. Cutting onions makes you cry. Mrs. Wang was joking about being abused, but when neighbor walks by, she hurriedly explained she was just fooling around. Peeled onions are for cold-dressed century eggs. Bottom layer of onions with tomatoes on top. Mother-in-law said, others sell this with tofu under the century egg, but our sauce is special, plus onions and tomatoes on the bottom. This also makes it healthier. Since they decided to open the restaurant, the cooking method and techniques were all based on, my mother-in-law says. To make Yunnan civilian snack shaozi noodle, you have to start with the ingredients. Eggs, tomatoes, ground pork, stir-fry everything into a pot of sauce, then mix it with noodles. In Yunnan and Myanmar, they eat shaozi noodle as breakfast. It's healthy. Mrs. Wang made it clear that every bowl served has to be filled to the top for people to have enough to eat. That's the spirit of Yunnan shaozi noodle. That is also why almost all the noodles is 50 NT. The price hasn't changed since the day they opened. Another dish, Yunnan cold noodles. It is topped with barbecued shredded pork, carrots, and cucumbers. Lee once heard Mrs. Wang said every time she made cold noodles for her children, she always got compliments. Now, Lee is hoping Mrs. Wang can get some accomplishments from the customers. Don't look so little on these Yunnan noodles. Ingredients are simple and so does the cooking methods. The key to the traditional flavor is the sauce. The peanuts have to be fried with high heat, then turned to poach. If the peanuts are over-fried, its skin turns black. Then the color won't be right for making the sauce. If you don't stir it, it might burn and will contain less flavor. Just by seeing it, my mother-in-law would know if it is perfectly cooked. She would say, "Oh, no, this one." Then you have to throw it away. She's lazy sometimes. She wants to get things done faster, so she will leave it there. Sometimes I'll fry up the peanuts and leave it for something else. This little missing detail has been brought to Lee's attention by Mrs. Wang. Lee is thankful that Mrs. Wang has always been advising her, not yelling at her. After the peanuts were fried, mix in sesame, Yunnan spices, chili powder, pepper powder, star anise, etc. Brings out fragrant, spicy but not pungent Yunnan flavor. They both test the flavor while making it. Lee prefers sour, while Mrs. Wang thinks the vinegar flavor is too strong that it doesn't fit Taiwanese taste. Normally, people think I'm too long-winded and she will turn mad, but she just always says, okay, and do it slowly. Another sliced pork sauce is also based on Mrs. Wang's taste buds memory. At first, they hand-chopped the chili, but Lee was worried it's too much work for Mrs. Wang, so they changed it into using blender. First, put in chili and garlic. After they're completely smashed, add white sugar to mix in a little sweet and sour to the sauce. Sliced pork salad, the famous Yunnan dish, is to slice the pork into pieces that are even thinner than paper. Fat and lean meat mixed together makes the texture less greasy. But the cutting skills takes too much time that Lee once suggested to stop selling this dish. It's very difficult to make this. She told me, "Ma, it's too much trouble. Let's not sell it anymore." I told her no. This is one of our signature dish. We must do it. It's a Yunnan thing. We're a Yunnan restaurant. We have to do it. I was there cutting it slice by slice. Actually, every finger of mine was bleeding, but I had to continue. As long as my both hands are still working, she relies on me. Lee always follows Mrs. Wang's instruction. There was a time that Mrs. Wang broke her arm. Lee had to put herself out there to learn the slicing. Her arm were broke, she couldn't use knives, so she would just give me instructions by my side. With Mrs. Wang's instructions, not just the sliced pork salad, the Yunnan chicken soup that used to rely on Mrs. Wang was then Lee's responsibility. People asked me why I don't just buy kitchens that are already chopped, but my mother-in-law doesn't like it. She said it is possible that they didn't take care of it clearly. Lee knows that Mrs. Wang is used to being the housewife that takes care of everybody, so she prefers doing everything on her own. In the beginning, there was just the two of them. It took them forever to prepare and serve food at the same time. Sometimes she would urge me. I'd tell her no rush. We'll do it one by one. Sorry, I am too slow. But it's okay, Ma, take your time. Customers would say our food is good. Oh, we're happy. Thanks to customers' consideration, they often gives them encouragements. They also overturn the saying of no kitchen contain two women by sorting out a way of cooperation. When it's busy, just focus on your part. Finish it as quick as possible. You won't even have time to argue or fight. Because it was just the two of us, when we work together, she takes care of the cold food. I would tell her which table ordered a cold salad, and I'll focus on my part. Actually, just the two of us is okay. But from getting up early to prepare till closing the shop and cleaning up, it is very exhausting. We both clean up the counter. You didn't let your mother go first? How could you leave? Leave everything to her? Ma also would worry about leaving me alone in the shop, so she'd stay and help me. Although they lived close to the restaurant, Mrs. Wang wouldn't bear leaving Lee alone to all the hard works. She insisted on staying to help, then they'd go home together. I'd fall asleep the minute I touched my bed. Every time she wakes me up, I'd be like, one more minute. I thought it's actually quite nice. If work is so busy, then you won't have time to think about anything else. You'll be just focusing on work. When am I going to prepare for tomorrow morning in the afternoon? Lee loves her mother-in-law dearly and doesn't want the work cost her too much. But she also found out Mrs. Wang no longer has spare time to mourn about her husband. She finally moved on. Despite the business in restaurant, every holiday Lee has another assignment: learn more cooking from her mother-in-law. I think my mother's cooking is very traditional and more authentic than the others. Other Yunnan restaurants' food are normally mixed with some Thai or other countries' flavor. So I figured I could learn how to make more traditional Yunnan cuisine from her. Lee came to Taiwan at the age of 20 to study nursing school. She was a neighbor to Mrs. Wang's oldest daughter. Mrs. Wang found Lee mature and diligent. She matched Lee with her youngest son. Lee often makes jokes that before she got married, it was more like she's dating Mrs. Wang. Their date happened in Mrs. Wang's kitchen. The day was to learn cooking from Mrs. Wang. More than 10 years have passed. Mrs. Wang and Lee are still in the same close relationship. Lily meatball is one of Yunnan's traditional dishes for New Year's and holidays. 3 little lily wrapped in half spoon of ground meat. Even the ground meat was a big work. First, at grounding the meat, you have to pound it thoroughly. If I wasn't thorough enough, my mother-in-law would tell me to pound it a little more. Pounding it through makes the texture softer. Mrs. Wang pays a lot of attention to the details. Famous Yunnan dishes such as braised pork with sauerkraut, sweet bao rice, all these dishes require deliberate work and patience. Even when the ex-governor, General Lee, came to Taiwan, he specifically pointed out coming to this restaurant. With Mrs. Wang's great cooking reputation, Lee for sure has a lot of pressure. Take sauté fish with chili sauce for Mrs. Wang thought of to put in some sweet wine to bring out the flavor, and to make it look good, Mrs. Wang grabs the fish straight up on the hot pot while Lee helps drenching hot oil. Then Mrs. Wang will take over the spatula. She's afraid it might burn my hand. There was one time I wanted to make ningbo cake because before mother would make for us. I wanted to do it in the restaurant, but probably the pot was too big. Sometimes the pot size matters too. I burned myself. Mrs. Wang has always remembered the accident, so whenever it comes to frying, instead of letting Lee touch it, Mrs. Wang would take over. Having each other on the same boat, they were able to accomplish one hometown dish after another. Too bad their business is doing so great that you'll have to wait if you want to taste their cooking. But if there's anyone coming to ask Mrs. Wang for advice, she is more than happy to help. When it gets very busy, I'd call her. I always say she's my firefighter. When it gets too busy that I can't handle, she'll show up to help me put off the fire. Make some cold dishes. These years, Mrs. Wang has starting to lose a little energy, so Lee only wants her to come during lunchtime. But often Mrs. Wang just left for rest. She'd see more customers coming in. She would automatically show up in the restaurant even before Lee calls. Mother and daughter-in-law, one works on side dishes, another works on noodles. They have been cooperating for 12 years. This restaurant has lost the grief of losing a spouse, but gained a daughter-in-law to carry on their cooking skills. These people we talked about today may not be CEOs from big business, but they all show their outstanding personality. They're all excellent female Taiwan new immigrants. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.